What I want to do is open up with a bit of a game just to give us the chance to connect relationally, have some fun as we get going. So with that, I'm going to call it the Shadow Game. That's my working title. If you have a better title, come see me in the lobby afterwards. I'd love to get a better name on this thing. But for now, this is how it works. Basically, we're going to throw a shadow up on the screen, a silhouette. And what I want you to do is, if you know the person that the silhouette belongs to, just go ahead and shout out their name, right? That's how it works, okay? So here is the first shadow. Jack Sparrow, that's right. Yeah, Johnny Depp in the flesh, but not in the flesh because it's his shadow, right? Not Captain Hook because there is no hook. Two hands and a sword. That's Johnny Depp right there. All right, second one. Mary Poppins. Okay, so I've seen the Mary Poppins Returns with Emily Blunt. Spoonful of Sugar, classic, so good. But apparently, there's a classic that goes way back in the day. Now, here's my question. Who knows the name of the actress? Okay, all of you are like, yeah, dummy, it's Julie Andrews. I didn't know that, and people were upset with me within the earlier services. So now I've learned, I've been educated. I know, Julie Andrews is the award-winning actress who played Mary Poppins first. So if you didn't know, you can say you left something with something worthwhile today. Okay, third and final one. This is the last one. This is a tough one. It's a doozy. I'm just kidding. It's about as easy as it can be, right? It's Batman. But here's the question. Which Batman? Okay, actually, let me do it this way. On the count of three, I want you to shout out the name of the best Batman actor. And we'll sort ourselves into groups really quickly on the other side of this. So 1, 2, 3, Christian Bale. That's right? He's the best. He's flat out the best. That's the only name that I heard. I didn't hear anyone else say anything differently. So, all right. So with that, the reason we opened up with this game is for this very reason, because shadows are shapes without substance. Shadows are shapes without substance. They're at play within kind of every day of our lives. Shadows are here within our lives, kind of following us around, and there's a significance to them, even metaphorically speaking, there's a significance to them that I want to unpack today. And here's kind of leaning into the conversation what I mean, that you can't really embrace a shadow. That, for example, let's say you got a little kid in your home, whether it's a child of yours or maybe there's a grandkid that you hang out with or a niece or a nephew, you're tucking them in at night. You can see their silhouette sometimes, depending on how the light is playing within the room. And if you see the silhouette of your child or a kid that you're close to, you can recognize them. And it gives rise to all of these feelings of affection and affinity and a tenderness for this child because you love this child. But you can't actually embrace a shadow. You can't hug a shadow. A shadow is merely the shape of the one to whom the substance actually belongs. And I think those dynamics are actually at play within our lives each and every day in far more significant ways. I think you could put it like this, that for so many of us, we're actually kind of tripping over shadows that are intended in this life to point us to the one reality or the one who we are actually made for. But here's the problem. It's easy to settle for a life in the shadows without substance. It's easy to miss that so many of the things that we're building our lives upon, that we're pouring so much of ourselves into, aren't actually things of substance in and of themselves. They are good things insofar as they are shadows of the one to whom they point to, the one to whom they are connected. And so here's what I want to do. I want to kind of spend the next 20, 25 minutes or so kind of unpacking this reality together and do so in a couple of ways. First off, I want to lay out a list of just, I think, common ways that this is happening for each and every one of us every day. So these are 8 common shadows, right? And again, these are good things. And so we've got, number 1, the purpose shadow. The idea that we're created for purpose, that life without purpose is not a life that is good or healthy or enjoyable whatsoever, right? Purpose is significant. You can walk through each and every one of these things and talk about the ways in which it is a good thing, it is a gift, it's worthy, it's valuable, it's a significant part of a rich and full life. But the point that I'm saying here is that so often we miss the fact that these things are shadows that are intended to connect us to the one who actually infuses these things with significance, and we end up building our lives upon them instead to shapes that ultimately are lacking within substance. And when we do that, what we build is lives that are lacking and substance, lives that to some extent are empty, even though they can be exhausting. And so these 8 different things, right? Purpose, morality, individualism, love, sex, money, politics, spirituality. I think all of these are common shadows that are at play within our lives. And I want to get to a point where we can break these down and kind of understand how the dynamics are working within them. But before we get that, there's kind of some work that we have to do first. And as we're continuing our series today called Just Jesus, the hope is that as we break down one particular dynamic of shadow and reality, it'll help us to recognize these dynamics when they're at play in so many other facets of our lives. And being able to recognize that will allow us to respond to the shadows in a way that is far more helpful. And so, the hope is that at the end of this conversation together, we can all do this. We can let the shadow lead us or you to real substance. That you can let the shadow lead you to real substance. By looking at one, we'll be able to recognize the same things at play within every one of them. Because, as we continue our series, essentially what we've been unpacking, we've been walking through this letter called Hebrews. It's really a sermon written in letter form, written by a Jewish Christian author, someone who was raised within Judaism and came to faith within a relationship with Jesus, right? And so first learning environment was religion. That's the environment in which the author learned to navigate a relationship with God. And the same is true for the audience to which the author is writing. They all have the same background and story, raised within religion, and yet have come into a relationship with Jesus. And there are some difficulties at play within that. Some difficulties that we see articulated within the very opening of chapter 10, what John just read for us a few minutes earlier. So jumping in, this is what we see. Chapter 10, verse 1, the law is only a shadow of the good things that are coming, right? That's proof. It's not just me being clever and crafty, putting together some poetic language. The Bible itself is talking about shadows, right? And the law is only a shadow. You're like, what on earth is the law? Well, the law is kind of a shorthand way of referring to Judaism or religion, right? Basically, the learning environment that they were brought up within that taught them how to navigate life in a relationship with God. And the fundamentals of this particular way of life are pretty simple. Basically, within religion, if you do good, you get good. And if you do bad, you get bad. That is how it works. And so every one of them has been brought up essentially to understand life and understand their relationship with God in this way, that if you do good things, God will give you good things. If you do bad things, some bad things are coming your way. And yet the author is saying that the law is only a shadow of the good things that are coming. That in a sense, what they have been raised within, religion, the law, is a shadow of some other reality that is far more real, far more significant, and far more true. And that's what the author spends the rest of chapter 10 unpacking. And so picking it up again on the other side of that nice little M dash there, not the realities themselves. For this reason, it can never, by the same sacrifices repeated endlessly year after year, make perfect those who draw near to worship. Otherwise, would they not have stopped being offered? For the worshipers would have been cleansed once for all and would no longer have felt guilty for their sins. But those sacrifices are an annual reminder of sins, of humanity's rejection of God. It is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. Now, if you haven't been with us over the past several weeks, you're like, the blood of bulls and goats, what on earth is happening here, right? So just quickly unpacking it. Within the law, right, within religion that they were brought up within Judaism, there was an understanding that in order to navigate a relationship with God, their sin, their rejection of God was something that had to be dealt with. And there was an entire system included within the law that was put together specifically to deal with this issue, right? You had the sacrificial system. So they had priests, and essentially the priest would offer these sacrifices, and the sacrifices would essentially kind of cover over the sins that had created separation between them and their relationship with God. So the bad things that they had done, the sacrifices would kind of wash those things away and make them good with God again. And there was even one sacrifice that would happen each and every year on the Day of Atonement, one of the most significant Jewish holidays. And on that day, the high priest, the most significant priest among all of them, right, would offer this sacrifice that was to deal with and take care of the sins of the entire people for an entire year. But the thing is, that sacrifice would have to be made year after year after year after year, for decades down through centuries, right? And so the author is saying that The very fact that these sacrifices were unable to essentially cleanse the people in any lasting or significant way is an indication that the system itself was imperfect. That from its very inception, it had an imperfection built into it in order to really indicate that it was never intended to be a permanent solution, that it was always intended to be a picture that pointed their attention forward to the reality of which the law and the sacrificial system and the entire thing was only ever a shadow, right? So this was built imperfect in order to demonstrate that it is a shadow of the reality that it's intended to lead us to. And you could ask, well, man, if it's a shadow and there's a reality, what on earth is that reality? Thankfully, the author answers that question. Verse 11, day after day, every priest stands and performs his religious duties. Again and again, he offers the same sacrifices, which can never take away sins, right? So again, the author's kind of railing against the imperfection of this system and the ways in which it cannot do what they're relying on it to do, what they're trusting it to do. And so then he goes on, verse 12, but when this priest being Jesus, when Jesus had offered for all time one sacrifice for sins, which was himself, he sat down at the right hand of God, right? Which is an act that indicates the completed nature of his work. He's sitting down and hanging out and relaxing because the work that he had set out to do has been completed. And since that time, he waits for his enemies to be made his footstool, which is a reference to Psalm 110. Book of Psalms is this collection of poetic prayers in the Old Testament that has really served as the prayer book of the church for the past 2,000 years. And there are many points within that collection, many prayers or poems that actually point forward to this figure that the people of Israel were waiting for, whom they called their Messiah. And Psalm 110, by the author basically weaving in Psalm 110 to this passage, is saying Jesus is the fulfillment of this, and every other one of these poems that's pointing forward, Jesus is the Messiah, right? It's just a clever way of weaving that in. But verse 14, I feel like, is where the author really gets to the essence of what he's trying to say. For by one sacrifice, he, meaning Jesus, is made perfect forever those who are being made holy. Right, over here with the shadow, with the law, you have sacrifice after sacrifice after sacrifice, none of them actually able to cleanse the person or restore them to a relationship with God in a permanent and lasting way. And here you have the reality who is Jesus, who offers one sacrifice, which is himself. And on the other side of that, we are made perfect, complete, forever. But then also he goes on to say, those who are being made holy have been made perfect forever. And it's like, well, how does that work? How can we be made perfect and yet we're being made holy? If I haven't been made holy, then in what sense am I actually perfect, right? What is this author confused or what's happening here, right? And the breakdown is essentially he's referring to two different aspects of our relationship with God. On the one hand, we have been made perfect or complete in the sense of our standing and our status with God, that is something that is set and secure on the basis not of anything that you or I have done or have failed to do, but completely on the basis of what Jesus has done on our behalf and on his sacrifice. And so that means all of our sins, all of our rejections of God, all of the ways that we have fallen short, all the ways that we have messed up, every single piece of that in the past, present, and even in the future has been dealt with by Jesus. And so our status with God is set and secure, not on the basis of us, but on the basis of Jesus, who was perfect. And so we've been made perfect in the context of our status and relationship with God because we're connected to the one who is perfect and who was perfect on our behalf. And yet it's no mistake that we still at times stumble and trip up and make decisions and mistakes and errors that cause harm in relationships and even to ourselves. We do that. I do that, unfortunately. I'm not perfect. And so, essentially, what the author is saying is that we have been made perfect in the status and standing that we have with God. And nothing can take away from that or detract from that or remove that from us. But in the context of us being made more and more like Jesus, more patient individuals, more courageous individuals, more loving individuals, individuals who are more able to speak the truth and challenge and in love and encouragement, individuals who are better able to navigate relationships in life. We are being made holy there as we continue to be shaped and formed by the love that Jesus offers to us. And so that's what we see the author unpacking here. Now, if I could share something with you, it's my birthday in a few days, which I'm very excited. Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, I'm really excited for it. It's going to be great. And so one of the ways in which I celebrate my birthday each and every year is with carrot cake. And so I want to do a little bit of a poll here, again, just to see where we're at relationally, what potential there is for connection, and maybe what potential there's not for connection, right? I'm trying to see what kind of friends I can walk away with today. So, all right, so when it comes to carrot cake, here's my question. How many people are down with the raisins? All right, yes, good stuff. All right, enthusiastic. Not many hands, but they're enthusiastic hands. All right, how many people are like, no, raisins are the worst. Why would you ever put those on a carrot cake? All right, that's good, Quite a few. All right, now how many people are like, why are we talking about vegetables and cake together? That just doesn't make sense. All right, okay, good. So, all right, I didn't put my cards out on the table because I didn't want that to sway, anything. But I gotta tell you, I'm down with the raisins. I like them. I enjoy them. I think they add a nice little bit of context and flavor. I like it. I'm the only one within my family who is that way, so I own that I'm the minority here, but I'm about it. So later this week, I look forward to enjoying a carrot cake with raisins as I celebrate my birthday. Okay, so that being said, when it comes to birthdays, sometimes I think we pretty much all know someone within our lives who is so good at giving gifts. That they're so good at giving a gift that essentially, you ever receive a gift from someone like this and you're like, man, this person like knows me in ways that I didn't even expect or anticipate. You receive the gift and you're like, man, you were listening and I didn't think you were listening, and you see me and wow, this is just a really meaningful gift, right? That is a wonderful experience. And then there's the rest of us who are not able to do that, don't have the skill or the ability to give gifts in that way. And oftentimes what we turn to instead is just, how can I do as many things as possible, kind of a scattershot, shotgun approach in the hope that one of these things will connect and land and be the thing that makes this a success, right? And that is basically a quality approach versus a quantity approach. And I think the same dynamic can actually be at play within our lives when it comes to the way that we navigate a relationship with God. That if we've been raised within religion, so often there are certain things that, we understand that if I do these things, this will help my relationship with God. And so, I've got to do these things in order to be good enough, in order to be worthy. And so I've got to give, and I've got to invest, and I've got to serve, and I've got to show up and participate within these things. If there's a need within my community or my neighborhood, I got to help out there. I got to, jump in and be there for my neighbor. I've got to do all of these things. This person's struggling with that, so maybe I'll make them a meal, and I got to call them, and I've got to remember them in my prayers, and I've got to do all of these different things. And hear me, all of this is good. None of that is bad stuff. But I think so often when we're living within religion, as so many of the people with this letter who was written to, when we're living in that, we end up getting exhausted, hoping that one of these things is going to be the thing that connects and lands and actually makes us good with God. And this way of life is absolutely exhausting. You could put it like this, that quantity living is exhausting. And it's not even just religion, it's even irreligion, right? When we find ourselves performing for the applause or the approval or the attention or the love and respect or the admiration of this particular group of people, whoever they happen to be, and we think, man, I need to do these things to achieve their attention and their love and approval, and then I've got to keep doing these things to keep it and to get it again and again and again and again, and it's absolutely exhausting. And I think what the author is addressing here with this particular group is that they're standing between the reality, which is Jesus, in which there is rest, and the shadow of the law and of religion, which is marked by exhaustion and uncertainty, and even at the end of the day, by fear. And he's doing whatever he can to bring clarity to them, to understand their situation, to recognize that they're not standing between two equal choices. They're standing between a shadow that has been rendered obsolete by the reality to which it always pointed to, which has finally come and arrived. And so he's encouraging them to stop wavering between the two and essentially to go all in with one. And we can see the way that he unpacks these dynamics as he continues the chapter. Verse 19, he says, "Therefore, brothers and sisters, since we have confidence to enter the most holy place by the blood of Jesus," right? I know we unpacked this last week, but it's just incredible that a Jewish author writing to a Jewish audience would talk about entering the holy place at all, let alone with confidence. Within the tabernacle or the temple, this structure that was central to the sacrificial system and the law, everything we're talking about, there was one innermost room called the most holy place where the presence of God was said to dwell. Only one person, the high priest, not even any priest, just the high priest, one day a year could enter that room and did so with fear and trembling. And yet this author is saying that somehow, some way, they can enter that very place. Not only do they have access, but they can enter it without fear and trembling, but with confidence. And the reason why is because of the blood of Jesus, the one sacrifice that has made us perfect, complete in our standing and status with God, not for a day, but for forever. And the author continues, verse 20, "By a new and living way opened for us through the curtain, that is his body. And since we have a great priest over the house of God, let us draw near to God with a sincere heart and with the full assurance that faith or that trust brings." In other words, what the author here is saying is that because of Jesus, we have the ability to essentially trust and rest in his one sacrifice, right? That if we go back to religion, you have to do the quantity approach, right? You have to go sacrifice after sacrifice after sacrifice. For them, it was animals and goats and pigeons and all the rest, right? But for us, it's all of these other things that we sacrifice our time and our energy and our attention and our finances, all of these different things, and we give more and more and more and more and more in the hopes that we will somehow be good enough with God as a result of that. And the author is saying that, man, this system of quantity sacrifice could never actually get us into the presence of God with confidence to begin with. Only the high priest could go in, and he went in with fear and trembling, and yet Jesus is one sacrifice. We don't even have to make a sacrifice. He is the one who has done it once and for all. This is the thing that actually frees us up to enter the presence of God, to have a relationship with God with confidence in the way that we were always made for. And to do so in the context not of exhaustion and quantity living, but in the context of rest. And the author is unpacking here what an incredible gift it is that Jesus has invited us into not the shadow, but the reality to which it was always pointing to begin with, which is him. All right, now, at the end of the letter here, at the end of this chapter, the author does some interesting things, right? Up until this point, he's doing everything he can to give clarity to these dynamics and the situation, the reality that they're actually in between the shadow and the reality. But then the author essentially offers them a challenge to not continue to waver in the midst, to not continue to shrink back from the reality and opt for the shadow, and uses some kind of striking, kind of what you could call even severe language. But what's important to remember is that the author does this in the midst of a context, right? The context being he mentions assurance before and he mentions assurance after. And it's in the midst of these two assurances that the author offers a pretty significant challenge. And so jumping into it, real quick, there's sort of a genre that I think is helpful for unpacking what the author is doing here. And it's the idea of a Jeremiad. So, a Jeremiad is describing a future to ensure it never happens. And a Jeremiad is something that, depending on the way that you break it down, is essentially a form of writing that's intended to bring about something. So if we go back to high school English class for just a minute, if you want to hang out with me there for a minute, some of the most common, popular, well-known Jeremiads are Fahrenheit 451. We got Brave New World, Aldous Huxley, and then the last one is 1984 by George Orwell. And so I think the question is, when you come to a work like this, is how do you know whether this work is successful or not? What is it even intending to do? You could say 1984, George Orwell failed completely because 1984 came and went, and thank goodness the world did not look anything like what he predicted. Or you could say that if not for George Orwell actually writing 1984, the world might have looked like he described, and it was actually the penning of the book itself that caused a shift in the trajectory of history, ensuring that the potential future that he described never actually came into being. For everyone who hated English class, we'll get out of it real quickly. But in essence, what I'm saying is, the author here, I think in a lot of ways, is doing the very same thing, describing a potential future, not to predict it, but to ensure that it never takes place. And this is what the author says, verse 26. If we deliberately keep on sinning after we have received the knowledge of the truth, no sacrifice for sins is left. Again, these are people wavering between the one sacrifice of Jesus and the many sacrifices of religion. And he's saying that you're wavering between the two. And in essence, the shadow, which was marked by the many sacrifices, has been rendered obsolete by the reality which has arrived, which is it is always pointed to. There is nothing to go back to. That option has been rendered obsolete. And so the author continues the flow of logic then, but only a fearful expectation of judgment and of raging fire that will consume the enemies of God. Anyone who rejected the law of Moses died without mercy on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. How much more severely do you think someone deserves to be punished who has trampled the Son of God, Jesus himself, underfoot, who has treated as an unholy thing the blood of the covenant that sanctified them, that made them holy, and who has insulted the Spirit of grace? In other words, what the author is attempting to describe here is what might happen theoretically, hypothetically, if this group of people who have been raised within religion, raised within Judaism, and yet have come to a trusting relationship in Jesus, if they were to shrink back from that and instead to opt for the shadow, instead of the reality, to build their life on the shadow, instead of the reality, what might happen? The author is attempting to describe that future in such a way that ensures that it never actually happens. And yet I think what's also important to take into consideration is the context. Because again, right on the other side of this, leading into it with assurance, and directly on the other side of this, the author closes with these words. Verse 35. So do not throw away your confidence. It will be richly rewarded. That's in essence what the author wants them to do. Continue to trust Jesus. You need to persevere so that when you have done the will of God, you will receive what he has promised. A couple of Old Testament quotations, and then he wraps up the section with this in verse 39. But we do not belong to those who shrink back and are destroyed, but to those who have faith, who have trust in Jesus and are saved. The author communicates this assurance after describing a potential future to ensure that it never happens, communicates this assurance that what he is describing has nothing to do with them. And yet again, the hope of all of this is that by coming to understand these dynamics of one shadow in its connection to the ultimate reality, which is Jesus, we could come to recognize so many of the shadows that we end up building our lives on in this life and understand the ways in which, when cut off from their source, they have nothing left to offer us. And so what I want to do is actually just kind of revisit. I want to revisit that passage, or the slide from the beginning that had all of the different shadows that we sort of stumble and trip over, right? Because if you could summarize this whole chapter down into one thing, the author's saying, you're between the shadow and the reality. Don't opt for the shadow because the shadow has nothing to offer you. It is a shape without substance. Opt for the reality to which it points. And I think that same message is worth considering in our own lives in the context of so many of these different shadows that mark our lives. And so just to kind of walk through them, right? Number one would be purpose. We are created to live lives of purpose. And if we're living without a sense of purpose, that is an unhealthy thing that you well know is not good for us. And so we're wired for purpose. And yet when we try to find a sense of purpose over here, building our life on the shadow in a way that is completely cut off from the reality, what you end up opting for is a purpose that is only as good, only as steady as you are. And I don't know about you, but I think as humans, we tend to be relatively unsteady. And so our own ability to craft a life of meaning and purpose, I think, is pretty low. And what we desire, what we need, is the ability to find a life of purpose in the context of one who is rooted and anchored, in the context of a relationship with one who brought all things, including us, into being. That is a purpose that won't change with the wind every other week. Morality. We have the recognition that there is such a thing as good and evil and right and wrong within this world, and yet to try and live according to that in a way that is completely cut off from the reality, to build our life on that shadow, I think is an incredibly frustrating thing. On the one hand, because we ourselves continually fall short of that standard, but even beyond that, the world around us continually falls short around it. And so this kind of need for justice and for things to be oriented to right and wrong, when you were cut off from the one who is the only one who actually has the ability to redeem and renew this world, that is an incredibly frustrating way to live this life, to understand right and wrong and good for evil and recognize that we're in the midst of a world that is completely, oftentimes, out of alignment with those things. Individualism, you are uniquely valuable to God. That's true. Right? Each and every one of us created in the image of God, fearfully and wonderfully made. And yet when we cut off that reality and we live just in the shadow, we end up just kind of living with this, basically just staring in the mirror, wondering at all the ways that we are good and worthy and wonderful things, wonderful specimens to behold. What it ends up doing is when we live just in that shadow, cut off from everything else, is we miss the fact that everyone else that we've ever come into contact with is also someone who is created in the image of God, fearfully and wonderfully made. And it leads into this selfish way of life that is anything but full or rich. Love. God is love. Right? I think intuitively we recognize that we're made for love and relationships, and yet again, to double down on that shadow in a way that is cut off from the reality from which it stems is essentially like trying to live a life. It's like trying to stay hydrated while removing water entirely from your diet. It just doesn't make sense because God is love at the very core of his being, the one who brought all things into being out of a motivation that was marked by love and created us for love in relationships. And so to essentially double down on that shadow in a way that's cut off from the source, it just leaves us with a version of love that is warped and ends up being so far from what real, actual love is. Sex, number 5. So at the very beginning of this year, in January, we had a whole series around marriage and how God is the one who designed marriage and offered it as a gift to us, essentially to live according to, and that sex is something that belongs within the context of that. When we double down on that shadow, essentially the shadow of sex, and remove it from God's design, we end up taking the gift and warping it in ways that causes so much harm, not only to us, but also to others, right? The gift becomes a curse. You could say the same thing with money. Jesus talked more about money than about anything because so often it is one of the things, it's the number one thing that we end up substituting in our lives in the place of God. Because it's the thing we look to keep us and everyone that we love and care about safe and healthy and whole. If I just have enough, then I can do that. If I just have enough money, then I can have all the things that I want to have a satisfying and enjoyable life. If I just have enough money, then I can open the doors that I need to open in order to get the things I need to get and pursue and accomplish the things I need to in order to have a meaningful and significant life. We think if we just have enough money, then I'll be secure, I'll be satisfied, I will be significant. And yet it's a lie. And when money is instead connected to the reality, what we find is that it's a gift. It's a gift that we can use to enjoy and that we can even use for the benefit of other people, right? It is a gift. It is not our God. Last 2, politics. I think this one's an interesting one because politics, they do have an incredible ability to shape the details of so many people's individual and daily lives. Politics are influential, and it's not worth saying that they're not. And yet so often when we lean into that in a way that is disconnected from the reality, when we just double down on the source, putting our hope in this particular political candidate or party or process, we think that this will be the thing that can actually fix and change and redeem and renew the world and make everything right again, when it can't. There's only one person who has the ability to actually change and redeem the human heart. And you will not find a political leader who fits that description. It is Jesus. And the last one, spirituality. I think intuitively we know that we are made for spirituality within our lives. I think that's why so many people who have opted for a secular way of life, whether that's marked by kind of an atheistic worldview or even agnostic, have found that there's something incredibly unsatisfying about that way of life. There's a longing for something that is higher than us in a sense. and yet again, trying to lean into a satisfying spirituality in a way that is completely disconnected from the one who created all things, from Jesus, is essentially like trying to nourish our bodies without food. And yet we get hungry, and so we start eating things that are not good for us in any way, shape, or form. In every regard, these are good things that are worthy and valuable. And yet when they're disconnected, when they are shadows that are disconnected from the reality to which they point, and we double down and build our lives on them, what we find is a life that is incredibly empty and lacking, and yet at the same time exhausting. And what Jesus has invited us into is the opposite. A life that is rich, a life that is full, a life that is worthwhile, and a life that is rested. And so the bottom line is, since our salvation is secure and certain because of the sacrifice of Jesus, keep holding firm to Christ. And every time you stumble upon a shadow in this life that is a good and worthy thing, let it be something that turns your attention to the reality from which it stems. And would it lead you to trust in Jesus more? Would you pray with me? Jesus, we thank you for the time together this morning. We thank you that you are the one who made all things, who designed all things, who brought us into being, who created us in your image, fearfully and wonderfully made. And yet you are the one who offered the one sacrifice that we never could, so that in a relationship with you, we could know the joy, we could know the peace, we could know the sense of purpose, we could have the sense of security, the sense of safety. We could have all of the things that we long for, not by pursuing the shadows of this life, but simply by resting and trusting in you. For all of this, we give you praise this morning, and we ask that you would lead us into the joy of trusting you more and more. In your name.